mostly focused on hearing. In terms of the test, we'll only be responsible for the material that we cover in this PowerPoint. Okay. So we can subdivide the ear into three sections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. I think everyone knows that the ear has two functions: both hearing and equilibrium. And in fact, the sensory cells, both for the hearing apparatus and the equilibrium apparatus, the sensory cells are called hair cells. And they're called hair cells because they have little cilia like hairs along the apical surface that sense movement of fluid. Okay? These cells are in effect mechanoreceptors because when those little hairs are moved, okay, it triggers an impulse that travels down the vestibulocochlear nerve. So they can be activated either by sound waves, which trigger movement of fluid, or movement of the head, which triggers movement of fluid inside of the equilibrium apparatus. Okay, and as fluid moves, those hair cells, which are embedded in those fluid-filled structures, they're activated. Their hairs are bent or tilted, and it triggers impulses. So again, activation of the hair cells, or movement of the hair along the apical aspect, is going to trigger nerve impulses conducted via the vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay, let's talk first about the outer ear. The outer ear consists of that which you see, which is called the auricle, or the pinna, which serves to direct sound waves into the ear. The auricle is contiguous with this external auditory canal. The external auditory canal is going to conduct sound waves to the tympanic membrane, which will vibrate in response to those sound waves. You already know probably that the external auditory canal is lined by ceruminous glands that secrete a type of wax that serves to trap small insects, bugs that could otherwise do damage to your tympanic membrane. Along the innermost aspect of that external auditory canal is your tympanic membrane. And the tympanic membrane serves as a barrier, or it serves as a boundary between the outer ear and the middle ear. So again, the outer ear consists of the auricle plus the external auditory canal. Its inner margin is formed, or its inner boundary is formed by the tympanic membrane. On the other side of the tympanic membrane is the middle ear cavity. Okay.
Oh, what a nice coat.
So again, the external ear is the auricle, external auditory canal. They conduct sound waves to the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane vibrates in response to these sound waves. Now, this is the middle ear cavity. Notice inside the middle ear cavity are three tiny bones. These are called ossicles. Okay? The one attached to the tympanic membrane is called the malleus, which means a hammer. The middle bone here, or ossicle, is called the incus, which is in reference to an anvil. I guess it reminds people of an anvil. And then this one is called the stapes, which is a reference to stirrups. Okay, so with movement of the tympanic membrane, we have a chain reaction with vibration of these tiny ossicles, which then stimulates movement of fluid within this inner ear structure called the cochlear. Looks like a snail. Okay, so the vibration of these ossicles is going to trigger movement of fluid within the cochlear, which in some way is going to cause movement of hair cells, movement of the hairs within hair cells that trigger nerve impulses. Now, one thing you should notice is that in order for this tympanic membrane to move freely, there has to be equilibration of pressure on either side. In other words, equilibration of pressure between the outside atmosphere here and the middle ear cavity. This eustachian tube serves to achieve that purpose, to keep pressure equilibrated, so that there's a balance of pressure on either side, allowing the tympanic membrane to move freely. If this eustachian tube is blocked, then air within the tympanic cavity or middle ear cavity gets resorbed, and it drops the pressure inside and it sucks the eardrum in, so it doesn't vibrate as freely. Okay. In fact, that's what happens many times at real high altitudes. Okay. you develop negative pressure inside the middle ear cavity and sucks the middle ear, the eardrum rather, in. And again, this is a diagram that just shows that the tympanic membrane is connected by the station tube to the nasopharynx. The nasopharynx. Draw a little picture here. This is the nasopharynx. Remember, it sits behind the nasal cavity. The eustachian tube comes in like this. And it's connected to the middle ear cavity like this. Along the outer boundary, you see the tympanic membrane. This would be the external auditory canal here. And we've connected to the auricle here. Good. Now, you have the same thing on this side, by the way. Remember that the nasopharynx is considered part of the respiratory tract. So it's going to be lined by a pseudostratified columnar epithelium. That's a respiratory epithelium. Okay, so remember that this mucous membrane here, the pseudostratified columnar epithelium, has goblet cells that produce what? Mucus. Okay, it traps mucus. Or it generates mucus, and that mucus is going to be propelled by cilia. Okay, so just as the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx are lined by this respiratory epithelium, so is the middle ear cavity. Now, what happens if a child gets an upper respiratory infection or even allergic rhinitis? With the inflammatory response, that mucous membrane swells. If the mucous membrane swells, because in a child this opening from the eustachian tube is so small that sometimes swelling of the mucous membrane leads to the closure of this little opening. So the eustachian tube, in a sense, closes. Now, the respiratory epithelium that lines the middle ear cavity continues to produce mucus. But now the mucus has no place to go. Ordinarily, it's drained into the nasopharynx and we swallow. If this happens, then this mucus is going to accumulate like this and can serve as a growth medium for bacteria. Anybody who's taken a microclass knows that it only takes 1 or 2 bacteria to proliferate overnight, where then you have thousands of colonies of bacteria that can then invade the wall of the middle ear cavity. So sometimes, particularly in children, if they get frequent upper respiratory infections, it's complicated by otitis media.
Do they get tubes?
Yeah, so what happens if they get frequent otitis media? They'll put little tubes in here. Now, these little tubes don't prevent recurrent upper respiratory infections, but at least when a child gets a respiratory infection, they can't accumulate fluid that would lead to a secondary otitis media. Any type of mucus buildup is going to drain. And so they don't have the buildup of mucus that serves to allow bacteria to proliferate. Now, an infection of the middle ear, by the way, is called an otitis media. This here, in this drawing here, this structure represents part of the inner ear. The part of the inner ear that provides for hearing is called the cochlear. That's that snail-like structure. Whoever drew this picture, of course, couldn't draw a snail. So it's kind of an uncoiled type of snail shell. But it does the job. It demonstrates the structure. Okay, let's talk about the middle ear now. On the other side of the tympanic membrane is the middle ear cavity. It's also called the tympanic cavity. It's located within the petrous portion of the temporal bone. We've already said that the eustachian tube connects the middle ear with the nasopharynx, allowing equilibration of pressure. Inside of that middle ear cavity are those 3 tiny ossicles, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And basically they serve to transmit sound from the external ear to the internal ear. Okay? In fact, the stapes, when it vibrates against the oval window of the cochlear. This is the cochlear. Here, the stapes is vibrating against a little membrane here. And they call this little membrane the oval window. It's along the medial aspect of the cochlear. Now, this cochlea is filled with fluid, so that when the stapes vibrates against the oval window, it's going to trigger transmission of these sound waves into the fluid. So the fluid's going to conduct those waves. You know that sound must have some type of medium to travel in, whether it be air or fluid. It can't travel in a vacuum. That's why in deep space there's no sound. So air is going to be transmitted from the air in the atmosphere through these little ossicles into this fluid within the cochlea. Now, by the way, in this lower part of the cochlea here, okay, sound's going to travel around the cochlea like this. And then these waves are going to bounce against this window here, which is the round window. So as the stapes vibrates and it pushes in on the round window, what do you think happens to on the oval window, what do you think happens to the round window? As this moves in, this pooches out. So again, the oval window and the round window are going to open into the middle ear. Again, this just demonstrates the small ossicles.
Looks like an elephant.
It does look a little bit like an elephant.
It's like with the horns.
It does look like an elephant.
Yeah.
Or a whale. Bottom. Weird head.
Or like a doodle bug, maybe. Y'all see that? It's like reading clouds.
I kind of saw Tinkerbell to be.
Now, this would be the handle of the
Thank you.
This is the part that's attached to the tympanic membrane. What's the name of that instrument where you can actually visualize the tympanic membrane? What do we call that instrument? An otoscope. Right. And so you can see the tympanic membrane and you can see the handle of the malleus. Yeah.
So with that instrument, the Otis?
Otoscope.
Otoscope, they're just checking to make sure that the tympanic membrane is still intact?
Well, no, you're also looking for changes. Normally the tympanic membrane is a pale color.
Okay.
And you can see the handle of the malleus like this, and there's a little cone of light here, which is a reflection of the light from the otoscope. Now, if there's an infection of the middle ear cavity, this tympanic membrane becomes red and swollen, and you lose the cone of light. Sometimes it bulges outward, particularly if there's fluid or pus behind the tympanic membrane. So you look for changes that are consistent with infection.
Okay.
Here again, we see the entire ear. This is the outer ear again, middle ear cavity with the ossicles. And then in light blue here, this is the inner ear. And the inner ear is actually carved into the bone of the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Okay. So another name for the inner ear is the labyrinth. Okay, again, it's located in the petrous portion of the temporal bone. And there are two components. There's a bony labyrinth, and floating inside of it is a membranous labyrinth. Okay? The bony labyrinth is just a space, a complicated space, carved into the petrous portion of the temporal bone, such that when you look at a model of the ear, like this one here, what you're seeing here kind of put it together.
Toward and broken.
Okay. The snail-like structure is the cochlear, which is responsible for hearing. These are called semicircular canals. This is responsible for equilibrium. Well, what you're seeing here is just a cast of that space carved into the petrous portion of the temple bone. Okay? Now, inside of this space, surrounded by bone, is a membranous labyrinth that conforms to the contours of the bony labyrinth. So, for instance, we said that snail-like structure, which is part of the bony labyrinth, is called a cochlear. And it kind of looks like this. It's kind of shaped like this. That's got a lot of curves, but I can't make all those curves. It kind of looks like this. Okay? That's just a space inside of the petrous bone. Okay? We're representing it in this model by this little cast here. So that space surrounded by bone is part of the bony labyrinth. Inside this, and we call it the cochlear. Inside of this is a membranous structure called the cochlear duct. Kind of looks like this. It's floating inside, but it conforms to the contours of the cochlear. Now, we call this membranous structure, part of the membranous labyrinth, the cochlear duct. So, again, the same would apply to the semicircular canals. The semicircular canals are a space surrounded by bone. Floating inside of that space is a membranous labyrinth. Just like you have a cochlear duct, which is a membranous structure, you have a membranous semicircular ducts. Does that make sense? So inside of this bony space, you have a membrane-lined space that conforms to the same contours as that bony space. Now, in your book, there are several pages devoted to this. It's important to read and look at those pictures to fully understand. We said that, oh, we haven't got, well, let's keep going and then we'll come back to this.